Hello, my quilting friends. My name is Leah Day, and welcome to episode 107 of this podcast. And today I'm tackling the topic 7 reasons why I want and need a long arm. And this is in direct response to a blog post that I wrote back in 2011, 7 reasons why I don't want and need a long arm. And obviously, this is something that I'm needing to update. I wrote that post 8 years ago, and I had a very different perspective. I had a very different style of quilting that I was doing. I had never really used a long arm before, and I had a slightly stuck up, snobbish mentality about that, and I got my back up. Some people had posted some comments to my blog about something else that was not related, and I kind of, just went off on a little rant. So in this podcast, I'm going to read that original blog post, and it is a little bit embarrassing, to be completely honest. But I'm going to talk through all of the points that I made back in 2011 and some of the ways that it's still valid. Long arms are big. That was my number 7, I think. Yeah, number 7 on that list was long arms are way too big and most people don't have the space. Well, that's still the case. You can't make a long arm smaller. It's a gigantic machine. But at the same time, there's a lot more to it. There's a lot that's changed. Long arms have come way down in price while home machines have gone way up in price. So, I really dug through it. And then there was some stuff that I was just flat out wrong about. I really didn't have enough experience about a long arm back in 2011 to even be talking about it. So it was really silly that I was even writing a post about it. But I share all of that and more in this podcast episode. I can't wait to get to it. I think you're going to really love it. But that is coming later on in the show. And please, if you want to get straight to the good stuff, check below the video. You're going to find a timestamp. You can fast forward just by clicking the little bar on the bottom of the video screen or your podcast player. You can click ahead so you can get straight to the podcast topic. You don't have to listen to the whole introduction if you don't want to, although I would love for it if you did. The introduction of the podcast, I always like to share what's going on around the house, what I'm stitching on actively today, and share what's going on, what is coming up soon, and what I've been working on over the weekend. So this is like my little update for the week. And first thing, what am I working on? I am sewing, I think these are 1/2-inch hexagons together. Yeah, this was a crazy person project that I got into several years ago. I think this was 2013 is when I started this, and it is for this version. Oop, I'm partially setting on it. That's a problem. It's for this version of Express Your Love. Now, this was a quilt, kind of a quilt-along that I started in 2013. I just wrote the story about this. I just finished up the story for Express Your Love for the Goddess Quilt book this week, so it feels like quite an accomplishment. And yeah, I pulled that out, and I have been really wanting to get the hexagons done. What I planned for, I had pieced the goddess's hair, that's all in there, and then I had planned to do hexagons for her body. She has a face, her body, her arm, and I haven't even started her arm yet. Those I think are going to be done with 3/8-inch hexagons. These are 1/2-inch, and then her face was done with 1/4-inch hexagons, and these are done. I just happen to have the bin here handy, and I can show you that. It was, like I said, it's a crazy person project. There is her face, and those are all done with 1/4-inch hexagons. It was nuts. That took months. Actually, that took years. So, yeah, once I finished her face, I was like, I'm not doing that for her body and her arm too. I'm going to switch it up. And so I went with bigger ones for her body and her arm. And unfortunately, I haven't even started her arm ones yet. So that's going to take a while. It's, one of those long-term projects I got in over my head with Express Your Love, with so many different versions of that quilt, and so many of them I haven't finished. But I really love having little putter around projects, little things that I can work on by hand. I don't expect it to be done tomorrow. It's something that I can work on slowly over the summer, and I really love that. So yeah, I'm not going to put any pressure on myself to try and finish this before I'm ready to publish that book. I am working on a book of all of my goddess quilts, and I just finished the 11th chapter, and we're pushing 50,000 words, I'm pretty sure. It's definitely going to be text heavy. It's definitely going to be photo heavy. I have yet to start the photos, but I'm really excited about that. It's going to be such a gorgeous book. And I only have 1 or 2 quilts left to write about. And in order to actually to finish the chapter that I'm on, I've got to get this guy done. Actually, I should say this girl done. So this is Eye of Calm, and I've got her with trapunto, has already been clipped away, ready to go. Got some baggy fabric issues going on around her belly, and I still need to sort that out, but this is on my list to work on today. I really want to get this going. I'm going to kind of stuff her belly a little bit with either fiberfill or extra batting. And then I'm going to get it on the long arm again. This is my first goddess quilt that I'm going to quilt on the long arm. Probably not fully. I'll probably do some detail work on my home sewing machine. And this kind of is topical for this post today, is that you can take a quilt and you can put it on a long arm and quilt part of it on a long arm, and then you can take it and put it on a home sewing machine and quilt part of it on a home sewing machine and switch it out and go back and forth. That's allowed. There's no rule that says that you have to quilt a quilt from beginning to end on one machine. You know, that's not the case. And I do that a good bit, you know, when I'm wanting to do some more detailed work, especially if I'm wanting to do travel stitching. I just don't have the control for that yet on my long arm. I'm working on that skill, but I'm not perfect at it yet. So I'll probably do that kind of stuff on my home sewing machine. And the bigger stuff and ruler work, especially, I can do all of that on my long arm. So I think that's going to be a lot of fun, but I have got to get moving on it because my goal is to finish the text by Friday. That is May 31st. So that's going to be a pretty tough deadline, but my goal is to have the text finished so I can hand it off to Josh. He can begin editing, and while he is editing, I'm going to begin looking at the layout and working on the layout of the book and also shooting photos. That I'm a self-publisher, so I have to do all of the steps. For this book, I'm doing all of the steps myself. And the main reason is I have the computer programs now that can do it. I have the time in my schedule. I've set aside this time through the summer to work on this. I like the idea of having 100% control over how this book looks. I'm a bit of a control freak, I have to admit. I was on a podcast last week, or actually I think it was about 2 weeks ago, and I realized while chatting through the podcast, I really am a control freak on a lot of things. You know, my books especially. I like to have a lot of control over how they look and the pretty photos, that whole 9 yards. So I'm really looking forward to that. I cannot wait to pull out my cameras and go outside and start shooting photos. And I say outside because I don't really have a nice space to shoot photos in my house. So I did this for my walking foot book, and this was a couple years ago. I put a piece of polystyrene, I actually screwed it to the back wall of my house, and I cover it with a sheet, and then I hang my quilts up on that. I just pin them to that polystyrene board, and I'm able to take fairly decent photos out there. So yeah, I set that up for my walking foot book. It is outside waiting for me, and I can start shooting those photos anytime, basically, once I get this text finished up, and that's really exciting. And, you know, my biggest thing with this is just making it a gorgeous book and really have kind of come full circle. Last week I was feeling just a little bit frustrated with how much time I wasted it's a fair criticism. The last goddess quilt that I was writing about was Dream Goddess, and that was in progress from 2014 to 2018. I spent a lot of time with that quilt just folded up, under my table, or folded up in a corner of my sewing room, or even folded up in the closet. I spent a lot of time just not being worked on, and I didn't prioritize it. And so, as I've been writing this book and exploring these quilts, I've really come to realize that this is a priority. This is something that's really important to me. And figuring out ways of sharing these quilts more regularly, of doing patterns. I mean, obviously, I don't know what kind of crazy person would want to make this, 1/2-inch hexagons, 1/4-inch hexagons, but I'm sure somebody out there does. So, I'm figuring this stuff out, and then also working faster, moving faster with my future quilts, which is why I'm planning on putting that one on the long arm. I have calm on the long arm. And I did get a lot of comments about last week's post. It was episode 106, and it was about, should I become a one project at a time person? And that's what I was asking last week. I got so many excellent comments about this, guys. It was really interesting. I got a lot of very long comments, which is unusual. A lot of times, most people will post something pretty short and sweet. A lot of people shared a lot more, which was very interesting to me. So Rebecca shared this comment on the blog. She said, I've thought about your one project person musings. I'd like to be a one project person, but I can't always be so. I think the difference lies in things I want to do and the things I have to do. In things I want to do, I am generally a one project person because I'm really motivated to finish that project and I don't mind what stage it's at. I finished a quilt this weekend that I started in January. The only part of the quilting journey I don't particularly like is the cutting. And she's excited about her next quilt even though the cutting is her next stage for it. She'll push through that knowing the fun parts are still ahead. She's a big believer in feeling the fear and doing it anyway so she doesn't get hung up on the hard parts. Instead, I research and learn the new skill I need so I can continue on. With this quilt, I had a couple of weeks where I practiced free motion quilting before I set to it on the quilt. My hobby is supposed to be fun, and if I start and never finish projects, then it becomes a burden and not a joy. Completely agree with that, Rebecca. In things I have to do, that's a different story. Since I started that quilt in January, I've also made 3 dresses for my daughters, 1 t-shirt, a child's sun hat, a doll's quilt, mattress, pillow, sheet. I still have to make a pillowcase and paint the doll's bed. If the children come to me and request clothing or they need something, I make it, even though I'd rather be making my quilt. Sometimes I gaze longingly at my incomplete quilt as I try and console myself that I'm improving my skills as a sewer and as an act of love towards my family. So this is really interesting, and I love that Rebecca shared this so in depth because she's completely right. We have projects, and I certainly have lots of projects that I just have to do. I have to have a quilt on my long arm to film Frame Quilting Friday. I have to have that video done every week, so I have to have something going, right? And then there's the quilts that I want to do, that I want to be making. I want to be making Eye of Calm. I want to be piecing this Express Your Love quilt. And that's really more of a want because I don't have a pattern for it. It's nothing coming out right this second, although now that I have the Goddess quilt, that's kind of pushing me to get this stuff done versus I would normally just kind of be sitting back and letting it flow however. So I really like that perspective and kind of maybe even splitting, my projects up into things I have to get done and things I want to get done. And being a one project person with the things I want to get done for me, and then having kind of a steady stream of projects through the, area of things I have to get done for business or, just simply, stuff going on in my quilting world. So I think that's really cool. That's a really good perspective. And here's another comment from Lois DeVault. She said, hello, Leah, love your rabbits. And I hear you when you say it would be nice to have one project at a time. When I started quilting, that's what I did. Only one quilt at the time. I was also hand quilting, and it took me about 7 to 12 months to finish one quilt. At first, it was fine, as we didn't have much of internet interaction, or I didn't go to Guild. But now, I want to have more than one project at a time because I want to try a technique, learn a new skill, and some projects like paper piecing or English paper pieces just take time. Yeah, no kidding. Meanwhile, I can sew about a dozen or more quilt tops and have fun with my fabric. So it all depends on how much time you have to spend in your sewing room. I usually am more productive from September to June. The rest of the summer I spend outside. And this is a really, really good point too. Time-wise, I have some months where I'm a lot busier than others. This past week has been insane with getting the rabbits situated and getting used to having them part of my schedule. So yeah, there's some times that I feel like it's just less overwhelming to have lots of different balls in the air, and it's less overwhelming to have lots of different things going on. But right now, at this time, James is about out of school. Next week, he's going to be home all day, every day. If I have Dad coming in to prep up quilts, that's going to be 4 people in the house all the time. And that feels very overwhelming to me in and of itself. If I have lots of projects everywhere and a lot of junk out on every table, it's only going to get more and more overwhelming. So I can definitely say I need to identify the time of the year and really pay attention to that as far as, projects and what I can take on and what's on my mind. So I really appreciate that. Smuggler's Cove Consulting on YouTube, she commented and said, I really enjoy your longer, chattier podcast. Yay, I'm glad to hear that. I think everyone has their own way of working on projects. For me, each project is very detailed and a long process. I want to enjoy the doing, not just the result. I do have projects lined up, but typically wait until I find the one I'm working on first, until I finish the one I'm working on first. I will get the supplies for the next one, a chair I am refinishing and making a new inset cushion for, but first finish the quilt. But everyone has their own way of managing their time and projects. Also, I try to control my fabric buying. I mainly buy only for specific projects, not just because something appeals to me. But that is difficult. And then she asked a question about Spoonflower. She tried their fabrics for a quilt, and she loved the different selections of the design, but she did ask, are there different grades of fabric on Spoonflower? Spoonflower is print on demand, and there are. Right now, I think there are 4 different types of cotton. They have new petal cotton. I haven't tried it yet, but I have heard great things. There is the combed cotton basic. Don't use it. It's kind of gross. It's really kind of, it's rather thin, and I just didn't like the feel of it. It didn't feel like a quality quilting cotton. Kona Cotton Ultra is what I have ordered up until the petal cotton came out. Kona Cotton Ultra is one of the best. It feels great, washes well. You want to wash in cold water. Wash with Spoonflower always, because it is a printing process rather than a screen printing process the way traditional fabrics are printed. So the fabrics can tend to fade a little bit more. That being said, I've got a set of cloth napkins that I printed, and I printed them with Spoonflower, and they're still looking great. They're still looking just as good as they were the day that I made them. So understand a little bit of care issue, and yes, different grades of cotton fabric there. Give the petal cotton a try, or give the Kona Cotton Ultra a try. I think both of those are really excellent. Britt Eddy commented, she said, I wonder if the question to ask yourself is, how many projects can you efficiently have in progress at a time? I assume the goal is to finish the projects and not accumulate UFOs. That's unfinished objects. One may be limiting and impractical. Of sewing related projects, I like having both something to do by hand, something easily transportable, and something for the machine. They do not compete for time, as the location determines what I work on. Sometimes projects that have to be set aside so the subconscious can work out how to proceed. However, I do actively work on limiting purchases. There is only so much time, and I need to use what I have before accumulating more. Again, thanks for an interesting podcast. Look forward to your venture into new types of fabrics. Trying new things is fun. Thank you so much for that, Britt. Yes, you are completely correct. And I like that too. I like, this hexagon project was one that I could just stash in a bag. The bag is like this big. And, I can stash that anywhere and carry that along with me. And then if I'm waiting in, the parking lot while James is in karate, then I can just sit there and stitch hexagons. It's no big deal. I like to have a little, quilt or something to stitch on my treadle, so that if I'm wanting to watch Vampire Diaries or do something silly, then I can just click that on and start treadling. And I don't have to, go cut something out. I already have it ready to go. So I completely agree with that. It's when I know that I have too many projects in progress, when every surface of my house is covered with something and I'm feeling frustrated, like it's in the way from what I really want to be doing, and the next thing I really need to be doing, the video I need to be making, for that week or something like that. That's when it gets really frustrating and I start to get bogged down with it. And I am being very careful now about starting new things, and I am being very careful and very systematic in my planning of videos and stuff, and I've got some ideas I think that's going to make that pretty good. But I think this is just one of those things that's different for everybody, certainly, but certainly looking back through all of my history of blog posts, I spent a lot of time with little, and I'm going to call them frivolous projects, guys. Frivolous projects. Sewing a t-shirt, making a beaded bracelet. I mean, sure, I still wear that now, and it was years ago when I made it, but I just think about all the time that went into these little projects And then I think about big quilts that I had in progress that were just folded up on the floor, fold away and put away in the closet that I really did want to be working on too. You know, Dream Goddess and Duchess Reigns, those were big, very important projects to me. And they sat in a very stuck state for years. And that's what I want to get away from. I don't want that to happen to my quilts or my quilting anymore. Okay, so on that note, I am still downsizing. I completely agree with Britt as far as limiting purchases. And I have bought way too much stuff, especially like jelly rolls and stuff. They are so addictive. It's total quilting candy. You know, you look at it and it's like, I can do 1,000,001 things with this. And you know what's funny? Picking this one out to give away this week, I actually looked at it and was like, oh, I kind of want to keep it. I kind of want to keep it. It's mine. You know, I can do something so pretty with it. And I almost stuck it in a bin and kept it. And then I was like, no, Leah, you have got to get rid of it. I've had this for probably 4+ years. And I think it's even better that I'm giving away something that I would actually want myself, you know, that I would love to use. But I think that's good because I haven't used it. I've had it for 4 years. I haven't used it. I want to pass it on to somebody that's going to use it, enjoy it, love it, make something gorgeous out of it. So the winner of last week's fabric bundle, which was Free Spirit Fabric Clementine, it was also a 2.5-inch roll up. And the winner was Patricia Maynor Harger. So congratulations, Patricia. Josh will be shipping that out to you this week. And a super special thank you to our new members of the club, Claudia I, Linda Losier, Vicki Gibson, Darlene Friend, Samira Cabral Furtado, Irene Rosa, Deb Ledoux, Marlene Dickerson, and Faye Roberts. Thank you guys so much for joining in the fun and helping to support this podcast. And everyone that is a member of the club is entered in to win this week's roll-up. This is not quite white Kona cotton. It's like beiges. It's different colors of beige going all the way to white. Very, very pretty. And yeah, I will be sharing who wins this roll-up in next week's podcast. And a little bit about the club. This is basically just a very kind, supportive place for quilters to hang out online. The money that we raise from this club just helps support a podcast. It helps support all of the free tutorials that I share online. And I also share a special video series just for members. It's called How Do I Quilt This? And you get to post a picture of your quilt if you're needing help quilting it, and I will share 3 different quilting design ideas for how to quilt it. And we are seeing some amazing results. I am seeing so many beautiful quilts posted, and I will be making that video today. So what else has been going on? This has been a nutso week when it comes to the bunnies. I got my Champagne d'Argent bunnies last Sunday, and it seems like, I think it was last Tuesday, got them in their cages, everything was going fine, and then it went from spring to hot in this area. I mean, we've had 90+ degree weather, and I went out to check on them, I think it was Tuesday, and they were really in bad shape. They were really panting, they were really hot. How I built the hutch, it just turns out everything I did was wrong. So frustrating. I mean, it's just, I felt terrible. And then also I was really worried that they were going to die. I started reading online, and of course everything is really exaggerated. I mean, you know, you can find all kinds of crazy online on any topic, including quilting. But for rabbits, you know, any kind of livestock, we already know this from having chickens. You know, it was hard to figure out whether, you know, what was going on was normal. You know, they were just looking hot and, you know, kind of chilling out and sleeping all day. And they were just not the happy bouncing bunnies that they were the first and second day that we had them. So did more research, you know, froze water bottles, set up fans, did all kinds of different things. And I just got so frustrated with it over the weekend. You know, I spent pretty much all day outside both days, just, you know, trying different things and trying to cool down the hutch, which is, you know, plus 90 degrees in the middle of the day. It's just really dangerous for them. And ultimately what I realized was just I built that hutch in the complete wrong spot in my yard. I built it in the full sun spot where from 6 o'clock in the morning until really about 5, 6 o'clock in the evening, it's in full sun directly overhead. And I took a temperature gauge out there and just set it on a tree stump nearby, and it was like 115 degrees, with the sun beating down. I can believe it. So combating that is going to be basically impossible. So immediately I started thinking, okay, how can I move this? How can I rebuild this hutch somewhere else? But it took me 4 months to build that hutch. I can't build another one in a matter of days, So I just started feeling really frustrated, and just I didn't know what to do, and I felt like I've already put a lot of money into this that I really wasn't expecting. It was an expense I really wasn't expecting. I mean, the whole point, originally when I was building this thing, I was just thinking to build a garden shed. And then I thought, oh, it'd be nice to have bunnies. And, then it changed into a rabbit hutch. And so one thing led to another. And, Josh and I tried to troubleshoot it. And, I got to give it to Josh. He has raised chickens now for more than 10 years. And his chicken coop it's actually, I hardly ever shoot a video or a picture of it because it embarrasses me. It's kind of cobbled together with tarps and zip ties. I'm not kidding. It's pretty bad. And it's an eyesore and it embarrasses me. But at the same time, it's cheap. It's kept the chickens completely safe. They've never been attacked, even though we have lots of wild animals in our area. It has never cost us very much money, and, we've never lost a chicken. So, and they love it out there. So, I've been critical of his chicken coop, like, oh, it doesn't look all that pretty. And he's like, well, it does the job, Leah. And he's totally right. So I have to give Josh complete credit for that, is that, he managed to build something that really worked for cheap. And I tried to figure out, ways of doing something similar with the bunnies, but they're really kind of a different situation because they're cage animals, and the chickens are free range. So it's a very different situation with how they're kept. And we hemmed and hawed, and Josh was like, I don't want them over there near my chicken coop because, I was thinking that maybe, figure out something over there. And he was like, predators, wild animals will definitely attack them. And, we kept going around the yard and measuring, running the temperature gauge. And I found that in the shade, it's considerably cooler. So we've got shade trees and stuff. And in the shade, it can be as much as a 15 to 20 degree difference versus full sun. And when I realized that, I was like, all right, there's no comparison. I really need to either move the hutch or build something new or something. And then, Josh just looked at me and said, look, you don't have time, number one. You're exhausted, number two. And you're really into this and you're really having fun with it. So why don't you just buy another building? And I really didn't want that to be the reason I put another building on my yard, but I have been needing another building anyway. I mean, we've kind of been out of space, and I've been wanting to put another building between some trees. And I mean, I hemmed and hawed about it and felt really guilty. I was like, you never spent this much on on your chickens in the whole time you've had them. But, the rabbits are different, and they do require different care, and securing them and making sure that they're not going to get attacked by wild animals and they're not going to die in the heat. Because if it's doing this in May, I can only imagine how hot it's going to be in June and July, because it gets even hotter. And so ultimately that's what we did. We went to the shed place where I bought the Crafty Cottage, and we found a cheap shed that, it'll do the job. It's going to be small. It's going to be the exact same footprint as the Crafty Cottage. And we'll hopefully be able to get it delivered in the next day or so. And all I'm going to do, I'm not going to do any of the refinishing and stuff that I did for the Crafty Cottage. I insulated it, and Dad put beadboard paneling up and then painted it and the whole 9 yards. We're not going to do that. We're going to stick an air conditioner in the unit and in the window and put the rabbits in there. And that's pretty much going to be it. And that will definitely keep them safe. And then, of course, I'll protect the walls and the floor with tarps. But I'm going to keep it really minimal as far as this shed goes. And then I can use it, also for storage for garden tools and stuff like that, which is really what I was needing. I was needing another place for all of that stuff to go. So truly unexpected expenses here, truly unexpected difficulty if you had told me that, hey, Leah, guess what? You're going to be buying another shed in a week, I would have said, oh no, we're not buying these bunnies. We are so totally not getting into this. And that was a consideration, was just to go take them back to the breeder. But, I really, really love them. I really love these bunnies. They're so sweet. I've, several, one or two of them, we have four. Two of them have just become so friendly and kind. And then, two of them are still a little bit shy, but they'll still eat out of my hand. I just really love it. And I really want to do more. Now that I'm, sitting there petting bunnies for a good 30 minutes every day, I want to get Angoras. I want to, get some wool rabbits as well. And I knew I wanted to get in this and do more with it. So it just made sense to just go on ahead and get a building where they can all go and they can be safe. They can be safe, they can be cool, they can be protected, all good things. And then I can also breed them throughout the entire year versus only through the winter and spring. A lot of times breeders don't really do that through the summer because it's just too hot. So now I told a quilting friend about this, my friend Katie. Hi, Katie. And she said, well, you're going to have a rabbit Ritz now. So I love that. I'll probably make a little... I'll probably embroider something that says Rabbit Ritz and hang it on the door or something. That was really funny. I was not anticipating any of this to happen, and we just made the best of it. And, I'm not sorry for the time that I took to make the hutch, the original hutch. What I've decided to do with that is if I switch out the roof panels for clear panels, I can make it into a greenhouse. I can make it into a little mini greenhouse and have space for trays of plants and be able to grow basil and parsley and cilantro and all the things that we love to grow throughout the year. And so in all truth, this has been win-win. And, I haven't wasted any time. I haven't wasted any money. It's been a lesson in frustration more than anything else. And a real lesson in research things even better than you think you need to, because I did a lot of learning in the last week. And another thing I said to Josh is I raised rabbits when I was a kid. I had bunnies when I was a kid, but there's a big difference between raising something when you're 8, 9, and I think that's when I had bunnies. I was 8 or 9 years old, and I just didn't care. I know I left my bunnies out in the heat, and I know I didn't always fill up their water jugs. I was irresponsible. I was a kid. And it's just really different. I'm raising these rabbits now, and I really care about them. I really want them to be, well cared for and stuff. And I just cannot stand the idea of walking out there and having, a disaster on my hands. So, yeah, feeling good that I did something about it, but still just kind of reeling over the expenses. Not expected. When I go into something like the Crafty Cottage was something we planned for and budgeted for months, then that was, I guess I was expecting it. This was very unexpected, but not all bad. Not all bad. And I'm glad we're doing it. I really am. And last but not least, Quilt Fantastic. This is an event that I'm doing in Kingsport, Tennessee on June 22nd, 2019. I'm going to date that just in case you come by and check out this podcast later on, maybe in 2020 or 21. June 22nd. It's at the Meadowview Convention Center in Kingsport, Tennessee, and I'm going to do a seminar on longarm quilting in the morning and a seminar on home machine quilting on a Q-zone hoop frame in the afternoon. So learn more about Quilt Fantastic and sign up at leahday.com/events. That will link you over, incidentally, to Bob Bolton's website. He is who you need to contact for tickets and to learn more about the seminar. So definitely check that out at leahday.com/events. And now here is the podcast all about 7 reasons why I do want and need a long arm. Hello, my quilting friends. My name is Leah Day, and welcome to podcast number 107, all about 7 reasons why I do want and need a long arm. And this is in direct response to a blog post I wrote back in 2011. This is kind of an update to that. Back in 2011, I wrote a post called 7 Reasons Why I Don't Want and Need a Long Arm. And it was fairly ranty, And it's kind of been the post that a lot of people associate me with, and in kind of the reasons they look at that and they go, oh, okay, I can stick with the home machine, that's a-okay, and that's certainly fine. But I want you to know that back in 2011, I had one perspective and one mentality, and a lot of the reasons why I gave, a lot of those 7 reasons were actually wrong. And they were a little, what's the best way of saying it? I didn't have all the facts, and I didn't have the experience. So in a lot of ways, I didn't know what I was talking about. And now in 2019, I can absolutely say for sure that I do want and need a long arm. I now have 2. This is the Grace Unique 21. It's set up here on my Continuum quilting frame. Upstairs, I have the Grace Unique 15R or 14 Plus on my Q-Zone frame. And I started with the 15R downstairs. So I had a smaller long arm on this frame and it expanded to fit this bigger long arm. So I now have 2. And back in 2011, I couldn't see having even 1. So I just want you to understand that your perspective can change, and your quilting craft should be allowed to change too, and allow it to evolve as you change as a quilter. When you get really stuck and rigid on something, and I was particularly fairly rigid in my mentality back in 2011, it can really make you stuck. And I was frustrated for years about my speed, about being able to quilt, simple quilts, being able to make, throw quilts for the couch. This is one that I quilted on this frame, but with a different machine. I quilted this on the 15R. And this beautiful throw quilt is, one of my favorite quilts for the couch, and I would not have made this on my home sewing machine. I just did not have time, but I was able to quilt it because it was so much faster and so much easier working on it on a long arm. So what we're going to do, and first up I want to say all of the quilts that I've spread out here on the frame, they were all done on the long arm. Different machine, smaller machine. So I just want you to see that you can quilt quite a lot. You don't have to have a big giant honkin' one. You can do a smaller machine and still be able to get a lot done. And that the fundamental reason why long arms are faster is because you are moving the machine and not the quilt. When you're moving the machine and the quilt is pinned to the frame, the quilt's not moving anymore. You don't have to scrunch it and bunch it and fold it and twist it and do whatever you need to do in order to get it through the arm of the machine. You're not having to stop every 4 inches and fiddle with it. You're not having to stop and check that you're not stitching it to itself on the back. You're not having to stop and check if you ran out of bobbin thread because you've got M-size bobbins that are huge. So for all of those reasons, it really is faster. But I didn't understand that back in 2011 because I had never really quilted on a long arm. So I'm going to read the original post, and as I read it, I'm going to go through and kind of talk about my reasoning and then how this has changed. So here we go. 7 reasons why I don't want and need a long arm. And this was published on September 24th, 2011. About 2 weeks ago, I posted about my quilt hanging system that's allowing me to quilt Emergence, a 70 by 90 inch extremely heavy quilt, easily on my home sewing machine. I think this is an awesome way to solve many issues quilters have with quilting big quilts on small machines. And if I could figure out a way of packing the clamps, bungee cords, and handles together, I'd turn it into a suspended quilting system and sell it on the site just so more quilters would try it out and start quilting this way. But I quickly began to receive comments asking why I don't just give it up and buy a long arm already? Why screw handles to the ceiling and bungee cords to the quilts when I could just buy a big machine to quilt my big quilts so much easier? I'll be honest, these derisive, eye-rolling kind of comments really boil my blood. Sorry. I'm laughing because it's so silly. I'm ranty, and I had my backup. And a large reason for that is because I had an established setup. It was in the other corner of this particular room. And I felt like that was cemented in place somehow, like I could not tear that down. So that was my mentality, was like that was permanent, which left no room on the other side of this particular room for a long arm. So I, in my head, had no space and had no ability to add a long arm to the space. What I didn't understand is that a long arm is, it switches out. So instead of thinking of like having both, I should have thought of taking out that setup, collapsing those tables, and then putting the machine in, the long arm in. I would have had space. But anyway, I'm just laughing at myself. Nothing makes me madder than one quilter scoffing at the ideas of another quilter or putting her in her place. And I'm really sick and tired of the snobbery that comes with machine choice. It shouldn't matter what you stitch on so long as you are stitching. I still completely agree with that. This is not a snobbery thing, not a bit. The ability to afford a long arm is a luxury. The ability to fit a long arm into your space is a luxury. But you know, these days, the average home sewing machine with an embroidery module, the big ones, costs more than this entire setup. So price-wise, we're running about the same. But either way, the snobbery stuff has got to go away. It's just a machine. It's nothing to get emotional about. Not at all. So allow me to rant this Saturday afternoon as I explain exactly why I absolutely don't want or need a long arm to quilt my quilts, yet even the really big ones. Yes, I expect I'll annoy a lot of people with this post, so if you rather not get mad at me, feel free to click here and check out videos today instead. Yeah, and that goes for this too. If you don't want to hear this entire tangent, then go check out one of my other podcast episodes. I got a lot of comments last week about podcast number 106 and working with only one project at a time. A lot of really interesting feedback from that post. So go check out that if you're not in the mood for this. Keep in mind that I'm not attacking quilters who want long arms or who own them. I am just sharing my opinion why I absolutely, positively don't want one, and I am attacking the elitist, snobby attitude that surrounds machine choice. And that goes for big machines, little machines, old machines, huge machines, expensive machines, or cheap machines. 7 reasons why I don't want or need a long arm machine. Number 7, they're huge. If I installed even a small frame in my basement, I would have to completely rearrange my sewing space to accommodate the large, bulky contraption. Right now, I have several tables set up around my Janome Horizon, but if I need to, I could work with a much smaller setup. I could even collapse all the tables and quilt in a closet if I absolutely needed to. But with the long arm, the ability to downside is essentially impossible. It's going to be huge and it's going to take up a ton of space. There's no way to make a 20-inch long arm any smaller. Now let's talk about the attitude surrounding the size. The general attitude is if you're serious and if you're dedicated to quilting, you will spend the money, remodel your house, rearrange your living room, etc. Essentially, whatever you need to do to make a long arm fit. Quilters that don't have dedicated sewing studios, who quilt when they can with the space they make on their dining room table or laundry room, are they really any less of a dedicated or interested or skilled in their hobby than those with wide expanses of space? No, absolutely not. That kind of snobbery about space really needs to end. Work with what you have, make the best of the space you are given, and see opportunities for improvement such as better lighting, storage, and make changes that need to happen. Okay, I completely agree with this. This is a major limitation for a long arm machine. I can't make this thing any smaller. It's always going to be this big. So space is an issue, and it's a reason to look at a long arm and say, you don't have the space, you don't have the space. That's A-okay. There's a lot of other alternatives these days that weren't available to us in 2011. You can rent time on long arms and many local quilt shops. So check into your area and see what is available. You'll first have to take a class, and that class will certify you to be able to use the long arm. It'll teach you the basics of loading your quilt on the frame, and it'll make sure that you won't break the machine whenever you use it. It is actually, you can break a machine. You can break any machine. You can break a home machine. You can break a long arm if you get on it and do something stupid. So there's a big reason why machine shops want you to take that class, and it can range from $100 to $200, but understand that that is what's required in order to be able to use the machine, and the quilt shop is making sure that you're not going to just get on it and mess it up and then ruin it for everybody, right? So that's an investment, that's an idea. If you absolutely don't have the space, you can still check into it that way. And then you can rent time once you're certified to use that long arm. You can rent time, usually minimum is like 2 hours. Some places will have different policies. And what I like to do whenever I rented time on long arms in my local areas, I just book out the whole day. So I'd bring a lot of quilt tops, a lot of backings. I would set up and I'd just try and stitch through as much as I could an entire day. And I'd be in the shop from 9 o'clock in the morning until closing time at 4. I got a lot done, and I got a lot done on a deadline. And I didn't have to rearrange my whole sewing studio in order to do that. I could just leave the house and spend the day in the quilt shop. It wasn't that wasn't hard. Let me just put it that way. That was actually a lot of fun. And then I got to feel like part of the shop, and I ended up shopping a lot then too. So it ended up being a little bit more expensive than just the rental time, but it was a fun way of answering that question and getting a lot of quilts done. So space is a consideration, and it always is going to be. Even the Q-zone frame, which I have set up upstairs, it is 4.5 feet wide. That's the footprint, 54 inches wide. So it's not bad width-wise, but if you set it up so that you can quilt from the back, then you're going to need to pull it off the wall enough for you, space for you to fit there. So you really kind of have to think about 4.5 feet square, which when you stick that in a room, it does take up a good bit of space. It kind of fills up the room. So it's always going to take up space. A long arm is always going to be a space sucker. And it is definitely, in my opinion, a switch out. It's choosing to take one machine and one machine setup and switch it for the long arm. And it's a way of saying, okay, this setup can allow me, takes up this much space and allows me to quilt quilts, easily, baby quilts or throw size quilts. It's kind of like that comparison. Look at it logically. What can you do in the space you have now? And then, okay, if I switch that out, if I rearrange this a little bit, then you could fit something bigger. As far as the snobbery angle, I think that this has gotten a little bit better, or maybe that's just my perspective because I no longer participate in comments and Facebook trolling and I just don't even read it. So I'm kind of anesthetized to any kind of snobbery. I just don't read it. I don't partake in it. I don't look for it. I don't look for negativity online, so I don't see it. So I'm hoping maybe that kind of snobbish kind of attitude is a little bit better, but also understand that this is the perspective. I'm an outlier. I'm a business owner. I am taking up a good chunk of my basement to run my business. And I even built the Crafty Cottage out in 2015. It's a cottage, a shed that I put into my backyard. It was a pre-built shed, put it in my backyard, and that's where I film a lot of my videos on my home sewing machine. And I'm actually thinking about switching that setup out to move the Q-zone out there. So my perspective is even a little skewed here because I'm not doing this just for a hobby, just for a craft, just to have fun. I'm doing this because this is how I make a living, and I support my husband, my son, and my dad with this business. So, you got to kind of understand that there's a lot more to it than just putting a machine in a space. To me, at least, I needed something I could teach on. I needed to be able to quilt my quilts faster. I wanted to be able to make more things that I could show, and then I could, do nice fabrics with and be able to quilt more quickly. So there's a lot more to it. And I think more than anything else is to look at it very logically. Okay, let's move on. Number 6, they're expensive. I can stomach shelling out $10,000 for a good used car if we're needing one, but I can't wrap my brain around spending even $4,000 on a quilting machine. When I first got into quilting, $300 was the absolute most I could spend on a machine. And I still remember the look on the dealer's face when I told her my budget. She thought I was a waste of her time. Again, the attitude from the elitists is if you're serious and if you really love quilting, then it should be no problem to take out a loan, refinance your house, sell your kid, etc. in order to get the machine of your dreams. But the fact is, it really doesn't matter how much you have to throw into quilting. I've known many quilters who have obviously more money than sense or skill, but buy hugely expensive machines that just set and collect dust. A bigger, better, more complicated machine does not make you a better quilter, and it will not instantly improve your free motion quilting skill. Only time and practice will do that. Okay, there are a lot of different points here to dig through. First off, expense. Yes, long arms are expensive. This is an investment. A lot of people will turn this into a business of long arm quilting for all of the quilters in their area. So it is a business expense and investment, if you think of it in that term. Back in 2011, I would say the minimum price of getting into this was something like $12,000 to $15,000. The prices have come down significantly. They really, really have. And I should also say, at the same time, home sewing machines have jacked up in price ridiculously. Just to give you a little perspective, this is a Janome Horizon 15,000. I bought this, I think I got this in 2015. This is a $10,000 machine. This actually costs more than the Grace Unique 21 on this Continuum frame. So I hope you can see that prices have definitely changed since 2011. It is still, from the perspective of my very first sewing machine when I had a $300 budget, yeah, I mean, if I was still back in, I think that was 2003, 2004, I couldn't afford it. It was just not a possibility. And when I remember that day at that dealership, and the sewing machine sales lady was just she just really didn't understand why I couldn't get financing. I wasn't working at the time. I was a newlywed. I was still in college even at that time. So it was kind of just a large set of reasons why I did not want to go get another credit card and finance a machine. And so I kind of carried that with me, and it hurt to not be able to get that machine that I wanted there that day. I think it was a Bernina 1130. I still remember it. It was a Bernina 1130, and she had like $650 price tag on it. And I felt like it was such a good deal, but I could not afford that. So I carried that with me, and that, feeling of wanting that machine and then not being able to buy it, and then feeling frustrated about the whole financing thing, it kind of colored my perspective on spending a lot on machines for a long time. But obviously by 2015, it wasn't bothering me too much. I was buying huge home sewing machines. I was buying machines in the Horizon line, Janome Horizons. Those are massive, and they're very, very expensive. And basically for the same price, you can get a giant home sewing machine and still be pushing your quilt on the machine and kind of fighting with it, or you can get a Longarm and have a much easier, faster quilting experience. Okay, so the whole elitist mentality about being serious, again, this is kind of a snobbery kind of thing. Don't get sensitive about it. It's not something emotional. Kind of look at that quilter, that is buying all of this stuff, and understand that, hey, this is what she wants to do with her money. That's a-okay. If that's not what you want to do with your money, then that's a-okay. If you're a more frugal quilter, be proud of your frugality. If you are a more spendy quilter, be happy that you have the cash to spend. There's no reason to feel bad about this, guys. There's no reason to feel icky about it. And comparison is the thief of joy. Always keep that in mind. Something I repeat to myself a lot. Okay, quilters who have more money than sense and buy huge machines only to let them sit there and collect dust. I have seen this so many times, and it drives me nuts. I have heard from quilters that buy giant long arms and then get intimidated by them and don't touch them, don't use them. They set up the whole frame in their house, and then they don't use them and they don't touch them. I mean, guys, that is silly. That is taking it to an extreme. If you're gonna shell out the cash, get it out of the box. I shared a video when I unboxed and set this machine up for the very first time. I shared my very first quilting stitches to help, troubleshoot that through that beginning area and that tricky time where you're kind of afraid of the machine, you don't really know what to expect. So definitely watch that video, and you can see kind of how I get to know a machine for the very first stitch out. I think it's really good to understand. It is intimidating. It is a big machine. You're afraid you're going to break it. It's expensive. You're just afraid of it, and that's normal. I do think something really helpful is to help build the machine and frame. Do not just hand it to your husband or your son or your brother or whoever and let them build it for you and step away from it. I think that leads to a lot of intimidation, a lot more, because you haven't had your hands on it. You haven't been screwing in the screws and running the drill and all that good stuff. So definitely get in and be involved in building your frame. I think that'll help with the intimidation factor. And then also, don't invest in something like this when you're going to be gone for 6 months and you don't have time to pull it out and set it up and start using it. You want to be able to get it set up and start playing. And then if there's any kind of defect or issue with your machine, that can be sorted out immediately. You don't want to just leave it sitting there in the box. It's a big investment, and it's something that you want to wait. Make sure that you have your space ready. If you're remodeling your whole house, that's not the time to buy a long arm quilting frame. I'm only saying this because I've experienced this multiple times before, and it does happen. And I've done it myself where, the house is in chaos, but, I want this thing and maybe that'll make me feel better, so I go buy it. No, not so much. It just only adds to the chaos. So make sure your space is completely ready, everything is solid, and then make that investment so it's not just sitting there collecting dust. And make sure that you're going to use it. That's the most important thing. Okay. Bigger, better, more complicated machines does not make you a better quilter and will not instantly improve your free motion quilting skill. I completely still agree with that. This is going to take practice. If you're going to be moving the machine yourself, you're not getting a computerized system to move the machine for you, which that's an option with long arms. I should go on ahead and throw that out there. If you are moving the machine, please understand that you are going to have to learn how to move it smoothly and easily and form the designs. So you're going to have to learn how to do stippling and paisley and pebbling and McTavishing and all of the designs that you want to stitch. You're going to have to memorize them. That requires practice. That requires making ugly stitches. That requires, travel stitching horribly and having, nasty thread buildup and loops on the back, and all the things that you're terrified of doing right now on your home sewing machine is basically going to happen also on a long arm. So if you're curious about this, if you're thinking, oh, this is going to make me so brave, it's actually the opposite. What tends to happen is if you are super, super terrified of even trying free motion quilting on your home machine, well, then you're going to probably still be just as terrified of quilting on a long arm. So my best advice, start quilting right now on the machine you have right now. And that's going to give you a baseline of how things are going, how things are going to work. And it's a great way to get started because it's using what you've got right now. Okay, number 5, I quilt for me. This should probably be my slogan. I should put it on t-shirts so everyone knows how selfish I am. Sorry. This is cracking me up. Why is this important? Because in order to afford a long arm quilting system, most quilters will start quilting for other quilters. This isn't a problem in and of itself. Lord knows I support anyone wanting to create their own business and make money on their own. But here's what I do have a problem with. The quilters that don't want to turn their hobby and passion into a business, feeling pushed and prodded into it due to the high cost of the machine. As I've written before, finding a balance between a craft you love and your business is an endless battle. I have no idea how quilters who long arm for money can turn off the business aspect of the craft in order to find enjoyment in the quilting for themselves. This is one situation I never want to find myself in, and another reason why a long arm is not for me. Okay, back in 2011, certainly when a long arm cost $30,000, it was a business expense, and it certainly would push you into long arming for other people and that long arm quilting business. These days, not so much. When you can pick up this system for less than $10,000, and credit is easy to find. Put it on a credit card, pay it off quickly so you don't get hit with interest. Then, a lot of quilters can float that. Not everybody. I'm not saying that everybody can do it. I'm not saying it's for everybody, but I'm saying it's a lot more affordable than it was in 2011. However, that I quilt for me, that was really coming from, I was feeling at that time just like everything I was doing was for video and for the business, and I wasn't having a lot of time for quilting for myself. And I have to say, once I got the long arm, that flipped around. Suddenly I did have time to quilt quilts that I really wanted. This is one of my most recent quilts that I wanted to make a big giant tree quilt from one of the blocks in our friendship quilt along. And, this idea was kind of just like a silly little tangent. It was like, oh, I wonder if I could make a supersized version of that block and quilt it. And it was also kind of a journey of practicing pantographs too. And then I was able to actually knock it out, quilt it, and finish it. And this quilt is huge. I don't remember. I think I ended up, it's somewhere in the 80s. I could not have made this spring. I could not have made this in 6 months right now with how much time I have to quilt in. And I was able to quilt this, and Dad and I kind of quilted it together. He helped me piece it, and then he did some of the pantographs, and I did some of the pantographs, and we quilted it together. We would not have been able to do that if I had been quilting on my home machine. So in a few ways, I disagree with what I said in 2011. Because instead of giving me less time to quilt, because I was quilting so much more for other people, and for me that is quilting on video, it gave me more time to quilt for myself, because I could knock out something faster and shoot a video on it, and then I could put something that was really meaningful to me on the frame and quilt that for me. So yeah, it will give you more time. It will give you more space to do that. And you don't have to turn it into a business now. It is, I think, affordable enough that you can make that decision. But if you want to turn it into business, you can do that too. You've got enough space there that you can make that decision, even just quilting quilts for your friends. Or some quilters I've heard of kind of forming almost a cooperative. And this actually happened in my local area, where several quilters got together and bought a frame together and a long arm together, and then they all got to share it. It was 5 or 6 quilters. They all got to share it and share time on that one machine. And, of course, they had to kind of have like a chart and schedule and stuff like that, and you might not enjoy having to do that extra complication, but it would cut down on the price, and it would give you something you can do with your friends. Maybe that would be an idea. Okay, getting back on track. Number 4, I quilt from the center. I like quilting my quilts from the center of the quilt to the outside edges, filling each section with color and seeing the quilt come to life. While I have never quilted an entire quilt on a long arm, I know you don't really quilt from the center in the same way. While everyone has a different opinion about this, Personally, I would dislike having to work from edge to edge from the top to the bottom of the quilt. What if I had a section on my quilt that covered 50 inches of space from the top to the middle? With a domestic machine, I can start in the center and fill that entire space, maintaining the design and fills and thread color throughout. From what I understand about long arms and how they work, I'd have about 20 inches of space to work on at a time, then I have to break thread and advance the quilt to get to the rest of the area. While yes, I know professional long arms can do this perfectly, it just seems a bit counterintuitive to me. Okay, this is a fair point, and it is something that I still think about. Let's say you had a quilt that you wanted to do a giant super spiral on. Great example of this, my Mega Pinwheel Star quilt. I did a giant super spiral on it. That quilt was quilted on a home sewing machine with a walking foot. It is not possible to quilt a super spiral on a long arm. And the reason is I do have a limitation in the size of the frame, how much space you have to quilt in. So this 21-inch long arm has about 17.5 inches is what I've measured from the back rail. So here it's extended as far forward as it can be, and now I'm pushing it back. That's as far back as it can go. I've got about 17.5 inches, okay? So obviously I could not take an 70-inch quilt and stitch a 70-inch spiral on it, because that would start from the center and grow, and I would hit my rails. Now, I could quilt it if I really wanted to go completely insane by breaking thread, at the top, like kind of stitch it and then break thread and then try and advance the quilt and then pick up thread and then continue the spiral. It would be insane. It would be completely nuts. So, yeah, there are designs that you can quilt on a home machine, but you cannot quilt easily on a long arm. You could quilt them theoretically, but it would make you crazy. So yes, that's absolutely true. And you need to think about that. If you like taking a spiral and stitching that over an entire quilt, then you are better off sticking with a home sewing machine and a walking foot. That is one situation where that is the absolute best setup that you can do. So stick with it. If you want to do pantographs, really simple, flowy designs from edge to edge, a long arm does that better. A long arm does that easier, because that's really how the machine is designed to work. It's designed to go from edge to edge. Back in 2011, the main way I was quilting my quilts was with super, super dense filler designs. That's what I was known for. That's what I was doing on all of my quilts. I was not quilting this way. I was not quilting nice and open, soft, flowy designs so that way I could cuddle with the quilt on my bed or on my couch. That's not how I was quilting in 2011. I was quilting the snot out of everything. So here is actually an example of my quilting the snot out of everything. These are actually embroidery designs that were digitized from my free motion quilting patterns. And so this is the scale that I was quilting at the time. And, you know, 1/8 inch scale, super, super stiff. This is not something that you would want to cuddle with. This is something you'd want to put on a table as a table runner. This is something you'd want to make a bag out of. You know, this is something that is very decorative. It is not utilitarian. It's not a soft quilt that's cuddly. And that was what I was doing at the time. And I have found, getting into long arm quilting, that that is actually hard to do on a long arm. Dense, super, super dense quilting requires a lot of control over the machine. Micro handlebars are something that other machine brands have. This Unique 21 has positionable handlebars, so this can roll around. And I have found that that makes it just a little bit easier to quilt dense. But it's harder. You know, you have a lot of more weight and inertia of the machine rolling around, and that kind of, it tends to want to go big. So it's easier to quilt big open designs and very soft quilts. That's really easy on a long arm. The more space that you have in the machine, kind of the heavier it is, the more it wants to move and groove and make nice, big, sweeping movements. And that's going to be easier on a long arm. So you've got to think about what you want to do. All of my show quilts, every single one of them was quilted on a home sewing machine because I had the control, because I was making tiny little movements with my hands. I was also killing my shoulders, but that was easier to do on a home machine. I had more control and fine-tuned control over every single movement because I was mostly just wiggling my fingers and, you know, moving my shoulders a little bit. And it was hard because, of course, that's a big quilt packed into a small home sewing machine. So I need you to understand that different machines do different things really well, you know, and you kind of have to fit the machine to the style of quilting you're wanting to do. In 2016, when I started really looking at long arms and I really started looking at frames, I was interested in quilting bigger, more open, and faster. I was sick and tired of this dense filling. It's pretty, it's gorgeous, it's wonderful, but I had done enough of it. And I was tired of quilting my quilts to death. So getting into long arm quilting, a lot of the reason why is because I wanted to quilt faster and bigger and finish more quilts quickly. And, you know, this is just an example of that. You know, I've been able to quilt quilts for charity, something I had not been able to do for years because I was able to put a machine, you know, quilt on the machine and stitch it in an hour and get it back off and get it bound so that way I could donate it. You know, so I was able to do the style of quilting that I wanted to do. But if you're wanting to do super dense stuff, and if you're wanting to keep those projects small, and if you're wanting to do big giant spirals over your quilt, understand all of those things can be done on your home sewing machine. So stick with your home sewing machine because that's going to be really the best bet. Okay, so now number 3, I don't want to learn how to quilt all over again. I'm a pretty good quilter on a domestic sewing machine. I can easily stitch on an 1/8 inch scale and achieve dense stitches I like to create on a quilt. On a long arm, it might take years for me to achieve this kind of mastery. While the two are pretty much the same as far as forming and quilting designs, moving the machine rather than moving the quilt is quite a different application of the stitches. The few times I have touched a long arm, I have been literally pulled around by the inertia of the huge heavy machine. Yes, I'm sure I could learn how to wrangle it and eventually learn how to control it, but I don't really want to. If I can quilt on a domestic, why would I ever need a long arm? As for the attitude that really cheeses me off, most people cannot believe I quilt on a domestic. They look at me like I've grown 2 heads when I explain I don't own a long arm and I don't want one. It seems that everyone now assumes that long arm equals awesome quilting, and that's just not true. You can achieve gorgeous stitches on any machine you use, so long as you take the time to find them. And what I mean by that is practice. Okay. Some things in here that I agree with. Actually, most of this I still agree with. I could stitch happily on an 1/8 inch scale. I was really, really proud of that. I was a little egotistical about how awesomely dense my free motion quilting was at the time. And that's where my limitation was at the time. That's all I wanted to do. That's all I thought was good quilting. And, I can go back through and look at my blog posts and stuff, especially when I'm working on goddess quilts and stuff, my show quilts. I was frustrated. I was frustrated by the hours and hours and hours I was putting into these quilts, but I felt like that was the only way to do it right. That was the only way that I could quilt it really, really well and make it good. I was kind of stuck on my own limitations there. It has been an experience, and a lot of practice has been required in order to get the same designs on my Longarm as I have on my home sewing machine. And I cannot quilt. Even now, I've had the 21 only for a couple weeks. I've had the Grace Unique 15R/14 Plus. I've had that for a couple years. And no, I can't quilt as densely on these Longarms as I can on a home sewing machine. Flat out can't do it. And the main reason is there's a lot of inertia. Completely agree with that, what I wrote here. There's a lot of inertia behind this machine. It's easier to quilt big. It's easier to make big sweeping movements than it is to make tiny little micro movements, because see this, I'm barely moving my wrist and fingertips, and I'm able to make like little tiny circles, but I mean it's hard. And that kind of it really does kind of tense you up and stuff. And so in 2011, I could not see wanting to spend the time to learn that. Now in 2018, 2019, I'm happily quilting in a different way. I don't need to quilt those dense filler designs. I don't want to quilt densely. I don't want to spend years working on a quilt. My last goddess quilt was in progress from 2014 to 2018. That's how long, because I just did not have time to sit down and do that dense filler work. And I'm tired of projects getting bogged down like that. And, I'm happy quilting on a 1/4 inch scale. I don't need a quilt on an 1/8 inch scale. Okay, so the attitude. People can't believe I quilt on a domestic. And I think that, the popularization of long arms and long arm quilting, the fact that, long arm quilting in shows, it's very, very over the top. There's ruler work. There's also the digitized long arming where, you can kind of plan a design and have the computer on the long arm stitch it for you and kind of go really, really over the top with it. All of that has really ratcheted up the intensity and kind of crazy scale of our quilts and shows. And so, there's kind of a perspective that in order to quilt a show quilt, you have to be quilting on a long arm. Again, like I said, all of my show quilts, every single one of them was quilted on a home sewing machine because I have not yet put any type of show quilt on my long arms. And I've won Best Machine Quilting and Best in Shows and, all kinds of different ribbons and stuff on a home sewing machine. So if you're wondering if you have to get a long arm in order to win ribbons at quilt shows, the answer is no. You can stick on your home sewing machine. You can stick with that, and that's okay. Now, here's a story that I don't think I've ever shared. And this was pivotal in the reason why I decided to get a long arm. And it was 2014, and I took a class with Sharon Shambo. She was one of my kind of quilting heroes. I'd followed her for years, and I really wanted to take a class with her, and she happened to be at AQS Charlotte. And I kind of complained a little bit. I was working on a quilt at the time, Duchess Reigns, and I was stuck on it, and I was also suffering from really bad headaches. And my shoulders and neck just had a lot of tension going on. And she was very kind and very understanding. And she said, you really have to get off that home sewing machine. And she pointed out, you might not even realize it yet, but you are having to set at a very contorted angle in order to quilt what you're quilting on your home sewing machine. And if you don't stop that or figure out a better way of doing it, then it could kill your body. It could cause permanent damage. And she referenced another quilter, and this is the thing, I don't know if that's true, so I'm not going to mention exactly who she was talking about, but she referenced another quilter who had stuck on her home sewing machine her entire quilting career and then could not quilt any longer because of the damage that she'd done to her back and neck. And I think that was 2014, so I was 31 at the time, 31 at the time. That had a profound effect on my perspective. It really did, because I want to keep quilting for the rest of my life. I don't want at some point for me to find it too painful. And really in 2000, 14, 15, I was having so many physical issues, and there was a lot of different things going on at the time. It wasn't necessarily just how I was quilting, although I do think that was contributing to it. I think I was sleeping badly. I had gotten out of yoga. I wasn't stretching very well. All of those things contributed to it. But it really made me realize just the physical side of this. If I'm kind of doing this number or hunched over or, in a contorted position for most of the day, then that's a problem. And I've been now moving, in the last couple of years, I've been moving to stand-up desks. So that way, instead of slumping over at my computer desk all day, I am standing instead. Moving to the Longarm, especially when I moved it to a frame, that was a big part of it too, was I would rather be standing than sitting. Several times my dad started working for us, he'd walk in and he'd, kind of hit me on the back, like, sit up straight, and I realized I was really hunching over when I was sewing. And, so I share that as a cautionary tale, only because this was my experience. I did find that switching things up, changing to a standing desk, becoming, making sure that I'm moving and not sitting so much, moving to the Longarm, spending more time standing instead of sitting, and certainly making sure that I'm upright and not hunched over here either, because you can set up the frame too low and you can end up hunching on the frame too. So be careful about that. All of that has been really good. It's been good for my posture and it's been good for my health. And that was something I did not have any perspective about at all in 2011. Okay, number 2. Most quilters start on domestic machines. That's home sewing machine. Most quilters getting into the hobby have a home sewing machine already, or can easily get one for under $500. What does this have to do with my choice? It comes down to being an effective teacher. If most beginners start on a domestic sewing machine, that is the machine I should be teaching on. Yes, I could make YouTube videos of me swinging a long arm around a frame, but I'd likely lose 80% of the beginners that read this project because that's not the machine you have or the way you quilt. It's important for me to be a good teacher, even if I'm teaching online and will likely never see you in person. I want to know I'm reaching the most people and helping them in the clearest way on the machine that they all have the most access to. Very good point. Fair point, well made. But, there comes a point where it's like, I've done that enough, and I reached that. I shared 500 designs on a home sewing machine. I've shared years of quilt-alongs on a home sewing machine. This friendship quilt-along that we're working on right now in 2019 is the first quilt-along that I'm doing half the blocks on my home machine and half the blocks on my long arm. I wanted to switch that up. And here's the thing, saturation is a real thing online. There are so many videos on quilting on a home sewing machine now that it's hard to stand out. It's hard for those videos to even get views. And here's another thing that happened, and I didn't really even realize this until last fall. I went to Quilt Festival and I was hanging out in Grace Company's booth and having a great time quilting and stuff. And people would come up and we'd, hug and take pictures and stuff. But I started noticing a trend, and that was a lot of people were talking about me in past tense. They would say, oh, I used to watch all your videos on YouTube, and I used to come to the Free Motion Quilting Project all the time, and I used to love that. And it was all in past tense. I followed you. I used to enjoy your videos. And what I found over the course of those couple of days that I was at Quilt Festival is that a lot of people had started on their home sewing machine and enjoyed learning along with me. And then they had progressed further along. They had decided to get into long arm quilting, or they had decided to move to embroidery or something else that I wasn't sharing. And they'd stopped watching those videos. And by me staying on that one niche thing, I was losing people that way too. And I needed to give myself permission to change and do something different. Just recently, I've been sharing videos on the Q-Zone hoop frame, which is our newest frame for Grace Company. You can put your home sewing machine on it. And those videos are getting tons of views, tons of comments, and it really is wonderfully interactive. On my other videos, when I share on a home sewing machine, I get crickets. So as far as I'm concerned, that's telling me right there that there's more interest in quilting on a long arm. There's more interest in putting a home sewing machine on a frame than there is on pushing a quilt over a home sewing machine. And I've already shared over 1,000 videos on that, so I kind of feel like it was time to change anyway. In 2011, I didn't have that perspective at all. The internet was still very new. I'd only started my quilting business in 2009. So things have changed dramatically in those 8 years since I shared this post. So just keep that in mind too. Okay, number 1. This one's really funny. It is not any easier. And I wrote that in caps. There's this idea that longarm quilting is so much easier than domestic machine quilting. I sincerely doubt this is true. I didn't actually have any experience to back that up. So yeah, I was completely talking out of my butt there. Yes, long arms involve moving the machine and not the quilt. And for some people that might work better for the way your brain works. However, just because you have a 20-inch throat and just because the quilt is wound up on a frame doesn't mean you're going to instantly touch a long arm and be transported into a world of perfect stitches and golden tension. Check out any forum from Yahoo groups to individual forums for each manufacturer, and you're going to find hundreds of posts from beginners desperate to understand how to use their machine. I've spoken to many quilters about their decision to buy a longarm, and most stories go something like this. I wanted to know how to free motion, but I couldn't get the hang of it with the machine I had. Then I met so-and-so, and she said I needed a longarm to do that kind of quilting. So I went out and bought one, and it was so expensive. But then I have got it home, and I still couldn't quilt. But since I've spent all that money, I have to learn on this machine. So that was kind of my cautionary tale. So rather than spend the time and energy needed to get comfortable quilting on a domestic, most of the quilters I've spoken to have been seduced to the dark side and purchased a longarm, only to find that while frame quilting might be different, it still requires hours of practice to master. And that is the entire ranting, that is the point of this entire ranting article. You have to practice. I don't care if you're quilting on a $300, $4,000, or $30,000 machine. You cannot achieve mastery of the machine just by turning it on. You have to stitch on it, play with it, adjust your setup around it, keep stitching, and eventually you will find your way through the ugly stitches into that perfect place where the speed of your machine and the movement of your hands finds a balance. So please stop blaming your machine for all your problems and fantasizing that having a bigger, better, or more expensive machine will fix everything. Chances are it's not the machine's fault. Spend more time quilting, less time complaining, and you will find better stitches very quickly. Saying afraid of it, terrified you will ruin a quilt, that's a place that will keep you treading water for the rest of your life. Look back to the first block you pieced. Was it perfect? Stop expecting the first quilts you quilt to be perfect. Here's another final quick tip. If your tension isn't perfect, please ignore it. Okay, I don't know where I was coming from with that. This is the #1 reason why quilters start and then stop free motion quilting forever. But if you ignore those ugly stitches, if you plow through them like a bulldozer with no brakes, you will find your way through to beautiful stitches eventually. Quilt every day for the next month, just 30 minutes each day, and I bet you'll see an enormous improvement on your quilting stitches. Go quilt, Leah. Okay, a lot of stuff here. #1, I was most definitely 100% wrong when I said quilting on a longarm is not any easier. Of course, this depends on your perspective, but physically, the act of moving the machine is physically easier. I can do this with my fingertips. This is much easier than pushing a big heavy quilt through my machine. Now, if we're comparing a 10-inch square, then it doesn't really matter because a 10-inch square on your home sewing machine is going to be very easy. A 10-inch square on your longarm is going to be very easy. But the real comparison comes in a big, heavy quilt. And that's going to be easier on your longarm. So I was definitely wrong on that. And this is what I said. And I said I sincerely doubt this is true. I had never quilted on a longarm in any substantial amount in 2011. I didn't have the perspective. I didn't know what I was talking about. So take that with a grain of salt. It is a lot easier to quilt on a longarm. Physically, I can quilt 2 or 3 quilts in a day and I don't feel it, versus, other than my legs being a little bit tired. On a home sewing machine, #1, I can't quilt 3 quilts in a day. It's too time consuming. I would maybe be able to get, it depends on the size obviously, but I would maybe be able to get like half of a baby quilt done on a home sewing machine, just because you lose a lot of time in shifting, bunching, squishing the quilt, moving it around the table in order to get to the next area. That's time lost. On a long arm, the only time lost is advancing the quilt through the frame. That's it. Okay. Yeah, just because you're on a long arm does not mean you're going to get perfect stitches. There is a caveat there. Number one issue that quilters have with free motion quilting on a home sewing machine is balancing speed and movement. Okay, being able to get good stitches while you're operating the foot pedal and you're pushing the quilt at the same time. Long arms have stitch regulators. This machine has a stitch regulator. I set it to 16 stitches per inch, and I will get 16 stitches per inch no matter how fast or how slow I whip it around. So I'm going to get beautiful, gorgeous stitches that are the exact same size and shape no matter how fast I'm going on this machine if I have the regulator turned on. I do not have a regulator on my home sewing machines. That's skill balancing speed and movement with my foot on the foot pedal and my hands moving the quilt. So that was the perspective that I had in 2011. My perspective was not to use a stitch regulator. My perspective was only pressing the foot pedal and pushing the quilt. I did not understand how a stitch regulator on a long arm was so much more accurate than any of the stitch regulators we had back then in 2011. I think the BSR was out in 2011 and it was terrible. When I played with it, I found my stitches got worse rather than better because you had to go really slow with the BSR. Not to be critical of Bernina or anything, that was the Bernina stitch regulator. They've improved, certainly, but how a long arm stitch regulator works is there are encoders, wheels, attached to the wheels so that when I push the machine, the stitch regulator is knowing and acknowledging how fast the machine is running, and then it's adjusting the speed of the needle going up and down according to how fast those wheels are rolling. And so it is very responsive. And, as soon as I slow down, the stitches get smaller. They say the same size, the needle slows down. As soon as I slow down, the needle slows down. As soon as I speed up, the needle starts going faster. Home sewing machine is different. You've got to do that all manually with your own foot, with your own hands. So yeah, it does take a lot more practice. It takes a lot more time to build that skill. As far as that cautionary tale, I've heard that a lot, and I've heard that many times since. No, buying a long arm is not going to make you instantly awesome at anything. It is a very big machine. It's a very big investment. It still requires practice. And you're going to have to do things that you might not be used to doing on your home sewing machine. You need to check in on your tension every time you turn on your machine, on your long arm. You need to check in your tension every time you change thread, every time you change your bobbin thread, because little things can throw off a long arm far easier than a home sewing machine. And that's one of the major things that I've noticed in the difference between the two different styles of machines is long arms require a lot more tension checks and adjustment. That dial is going to get some use. You are going to be playing with it, whereas a home sewing machine, a lot of times these days you can set it to auto and you never have to touch it. So different perspective there. And that has led to a lot of people, negatively commenting on or leaving negative reviews on long arms. You need to understand what you're buying. You are buying a machine that is bigger, that is industrial, that is going to require oiling every day. You need to brush it out yourself every day. It is definitely a self-service kind of situation. Your repairman, if he is pulling out a big bird's nest worth of thread out of your machine, you got problems, and I don't think a long arm is going to fix them. You need to start brushing out all of your machine and oil them and take better care of them, and they will all run far, far better. So that's something that you really need to get into. If that's a problem for you and you don't like maintaining your machines, then a long arm is not going to really be a good fit. It's really not. You've got to check in on your tension. You've got to, double check yourself and do a lot of troubleshooting on your own. And of course, you can reach out and get help, and all different long arm companies have different levels of support. But understand that there's a lot of it that you have to do yourself with your machine, practicing, having patience, checking tension, checking your threading, oiling the machine, all that good stuff. Okay. I still agree with this point about practice. It doesn't matter if you have spent $300, $4,000, or $30,000 on a machine. You cannot achieve mastery by just turning it on. I completely agree with that. It all requires practice. The more quilts you quilt on your frame, or the more quilts you quilt on your home sewing machine, the better you're going to get. The major problem that I see in quilting is that a lot of quilters know how to piece. They learn how to piece. They come from sewing, or they just get familiar with piecing and they start piecing. Okay? So piecing is the first skill that you learn, and you make a couple of quilts. Well, you need to quilt that quilt too. You make a quilt, you piece it, you need to quilt it. And I'm saying quilt it however you have a skill to quilting it, whether that's tying, whether that's stitching it with straight lines, whether that's, anything that you can do. If you piece a quilt top, you need to quilt it. Because the level of that very first quilt top, it's going to be very beginner level. It's going to have imperfections. If you quilt it, then your quilting is also going to be very beginner level. It's going to have a lot of imperfections. So they're all at the same level, and you keep your skills balanced, meaning that they are always progressing at the same rate. You don't get drastically better at piecing, and this is what I'm seeing. This is what I see all over the place. Instead of quilting that quilt and keeping those skills at the same level, piece another quilt, piece another quilt, piece another quilt. They start being given, the quilt tops start being given to Longarmers to quilt them. That's fine. That's supporting a whole different economy. That's terrific. But you're not building that quilting skill, so it stays very low, right? And then you keep piecing, piecing, piecing. And then you start thinking, oh, I might want to start quilting these. So then you take one of these quilt tops that's fantastic, that's perfectly pieced, that's way up here at this high level, and then you go and quilt it with ugly stitches. You're not going to be a very happy camper, right? Your skills are way out of whack. Your skills are way out of balance. And this is the major thing that I think is a problem for most quilters. You should piece a quilt and you should quilt it yourself, always. And that will keep your skills going up at the same rate. Now, of course, it takes a lot more time. If you're on a home sewing machine, it's going to take more time. You're not going to be able to jump right in and go buy more fabric and all that good stuff. But I think this is really the key to being a balanced quilter and being able to do all of these things yourself. And if you physically can't push the quilt through the arm of the machine, again, look in your local area and see if you can rent time on a long arm. It is a lot more common, and it's actually possible. It was not even something you could even think of back in 2011. So understand that we've got amazing resources to play with these days that weren't available even 8 years ago. Okay. Let's see here. Stop blaming your machine for all your problems and fantasizing that a bigger, better, more expensive machine will fix everything. Yes, I still agree with that. 110%. I see that a lot too. And certainly if you're running on super, super cheap machine and it's just driving you crazy, giving you fits, think vintage. You could go back. I've gotten into treadle machines, and I absolutely love them. Singer 15 clones. You can get them on eBay for $100. And, just search Singer 15 clone. You'll find many different people that have them listed. Solid workhorse machines that can give you a perfect quarter-inch piecing, and they're great for free motion quilting too. They are a straight stitch, lock stitch style machine. They don't have a huge harp space, but they're still a good machine. They're still a really solid workhorse. So I do agree with that. Stop blaming your machine for all your problems, with the caveat of if your machine is fiddly and wobbly and things are wiggling and you actually can't stitch a solid quarter-inch seam allowance without your foot flexing and stuff like that. That's my one caveat to that. There is such a thing as too cheap, and that's not being stuck up to say that. Now that I've gotten into treadles and, vintage machines, I can say machines, especially on the cheaper end, were much better built. And, you can get stuff for cheaper that's older and that's much better built than what you can get new these days. Now, you might have to go searching for manuals and feet and all that good stuff, but it's worth it. So keep that in mind too. Okay, saying that you're afraid that you're going to ruin a quilt, keep treading water for the rest of your life. I agree with this. You've got to quilt your own quilts. Just like I said with the scales, you've got to quilt your own quilts. And always, if you piece something, go on ahead and quilt it yourself. And as far as this thing about your tension not being perfect, I think really what I'm referencing here is when you're free motion quilting and just getting started, it'll oftentimes pull up eyelashes. It's a speed movement issue. It's a fiddly thing on a home sewing machine where if you are not going fast enough and your hands make a big sweeping movement, it'll pull your thread up and make it look like it's a tension issue. It's actually not. You need to just put your foot down and speed up your machine as you stitch nice curves, stuff like that. I do agree though, you have to have a certain level of blindness when you're free motion quilting on a home sewing machine and be willing to let the mistakes go in order to bust past that ugly stitches stage. There's a stage, and it depends on how much time you spend quilting as to how much time it lasts. But there is a stage with free motion quilting where your stitches are not going to be balanced, where they're going to be fairly ugly. You're going to have big stitches and little stitches and thread breaks and bird's nests, and you're going to have those tension pulls, sometimes on the back, sometimes on the front. It's going to look like a complete nightmare, and it's going to feel out of control too, because you are moving the quilt over the machine and you're not using the feed dogs, which means the machine is not doing what it is usually doing, and that is giving you perfect, evenly balanced stitches, right? So you've got to get through that. You've got to look at it and say, yeah, it's ugly, but I'm going to keep quilting it. Whether it's stitching a lot of stuff for animal shelters, dog beds, cat beds, they're always needing stuff like that. That's a really good suggestion. I know some places, some people get a little offended, but to say, make it for charity, your best, perfect, absolute, perfect stitches do not have to be in charity quilts. They don't. As long as it's secured and done, then that's a-okay. No one's going to be judging your quilting, but you do have to get past that area. And if you quilt every day, exactly what I said at the very end of that post, if you quilt every day for 30 days and you accept whatever you see at the end of it, then you're going to see enormous, enormous improvement in your quilting skill. And that goes for any machine, whether you're quilting on a home sewing machine, whether you're quilting on a Longarm, whether you're quilting by hand, it doesn't matter. You're going to see enormous improvement, but you've got to put the time in, put the stitches in. So, this is a marathon. I hope you can see how my perspective has changed in 8 years. The main reason these days why I do want and need a Longarm, let's see if I can come up with 7. Number 1, I really love being able to finish my quilts more quickly. I love being able to quilt them more soft and more open. I've gotten so much more done on my Longarm than I did on my home sewing machine. So speed. I really love putting the quilt on the machine, on the frame, and not having to baste. So that's number 2. I never have to baste my quilts again. And if I want to take a quilt off the frame and go quilt it on my home sewing machine, I can baste on the frame. So a lot of times I'll put water-soluble thread in my Longarm in the top and bobbin and baste the quilt here and then take it out to the crafty cottage and do some quilting. So no more pen basting. I don't have to do it anymore, so I don't mess with it anymore. And that's amazing. Just renting time, I should also add, renting time in your local area just to baste your quilts would be a really good idea too. It'll give you experience on your Longarm and on the Longarm, and it'll also help you get lots of quilts ready to go so you can get into the quilting easily. So not having to baste, faster, easier. It does feel so much easier. I can, just move this with my fingertips. I'm not fighting, I'm not pushing, I'm not pulling. It just feels so much easier. Advancing the quilt through the Longarm takes a couple minutes at most. Very, very easy. 4th, it's been better on my back, my neck. I physically feel better. It makes me feel good to quilt on a Longarm. It really does. 5th, prices have come down. This is actually affordable. I am a dealer for Grace Company for that reason. I could have picked a lot of different machine, and I looked at them. I looked at all the different machine brands. When I was renting time on a different brand. And, obviously I got to know that machine really well, but I could not justify the expense. When I looked for brands to partner with, I was looking for one that was affordable, that had really innovative, cool products, that was something that the hobby quilter could get into. And Grace Company was a perfect fit. And we had all kinds of really cool things like being able to do couching. This was a special foot set that you could get and be able to couch with yarn and stuff over your quilt. And when I saw that and all the different cool things that we have coming out, I was like, this is the company I really want to work with. So, looking at that, I just feel like I can be so much more creative on my Longarm than I can be on my home sewing machine. I'm sure I can do couching on my home sewing machine, but it's just so much easier to do here on my Longarm. Okay, let's think of, so it's more affordable, definitely. And let's see here, I think this will be number 6. I have the space. I have the space now. I collapsed a quilting setup. I sold a home sewing machine. I made the investment in my space by saying, which would I rather have? Would I rather have space to set up a home sewing machine, or would I rather have space to set up my Longarm? And I chose the Longarm over the home sewing machine. Right now I'm looking at expanding this Longarm frame. I can add a 2-foot extension in the center to make it longer, and I'm thinking about doing that. And that will be a choice between the Longarm and my embroidery machine. I have my embroidery machine set up against the back wall, and so that will require collapsing and rearranging that whole setup and maybe moving it behind me. So this is a choice of which is the most important thing, which am I going to get the most joy out of, if you want to think of it that way. Which am I going to get the most use out of it? What's going to give me the biggest bang for my buck, I guess is the best way of saying it too. So I think start looking at things in that logical way. It's not emotional, it's a machine. It's going to help you do something. I don't get emotional when I go out to my wood shop and I use a power drill, versus a hand crank drill. I don't get emotional when I work on a treadle sewing machine and I use my feet to treadle versus using my home sewing machine and electricity and the foot pedal. This doesn't need the emotion attached to it. It really, really doesn't. It's just a logical question. Would I rather spend my space with a bed in this room, because this was once a guest bedroom in my house? Would I rather put a bed here? Would I rather put a home sewing machine here, or would I rather put a Longarm here? And I've chosen a Longarm because of all of those other things it's helped me do. And I think the last reason why I really want and need a Longarm is because it's made me a better teacher. It's made me a better quilter. I got stuck for years. I really did. I got stuck on this dense kind of quilting. I got stuck on this idea that stitching the snot out of something made it good, that made it somehow worthy, or that made it somehow better than something quilted soft. And let me tell you, I have used this blanket, this super soft rainbow blanket is my favorite blanket to curl up with on the couch, and I have used it like crazy. This, not so much. This dense quilting is pretty, but that's about all it is. It doesn't actually have an impact in my life. I can hang it on a wall and it looks good, but I really love being able to make things that actually have an impact on my life, that I can actually really enjoy snuggling up with. And having the Longarm has helped me do that. It's helped me teach that. It has helped me be able to finish more things and participate in more things that I couldn't have done before. I was able to do different charity quilts. Actually, here is a charity quilt. I'm pulling some stuff out. This is a charity quilt that I'm going to donate. I have donated 6 charity quilts this year. I have not been able to share and do any charity quilts at all, ever, because I could not work fast enough with everything else I had going on. I've been able to do collaborations with other quilters and be able to stitch on weird stuff that I wouldn't have had time to do otherwise. I've been able to do the Friendship Quilt Along and make a king-sized version of the quilt, because I'm stitching half the blocks on my Longarm and it's so much faster. So this has enabled me to do so much more than I ever would have expected. And it hasn't been an emotional thing. It's not been a snobbish thing. It's not about any of that. That's all junk that women mostly do to one another, and has nothing to do with this. It's everything to do with your craft and your hobby and what you want to create. My goal now that I have the 21, is to quilt even faster. I also want to learn how to quilt my goddess quilts. I have actually a whole bin of them, and I want to start pulling these out and finishing them. This is a Peace Goddess quilt, and I pieced this way back in 2013, and she's still far from finished, but I want to put this on the Longarm and have the gumption, be very brave to be able to quilt that. And I've got some bigger ones. I want to do my first throw quilt, goddess quilt, where this one in particular is quilted super soft, so I can cuddle up with it on my couch. I've never done that before. I want to push my edge and really question that idea that a show quilt has to be quilted densely, that a show quilt has to have the snot stitched out of it. I don't think it has to. So this is where I'm going with this. I'm absolutely loving this journey. And I would say, if I had any message that I could give my past self, is to stop being so stuck up. Quite frankly, a lot of what I was reading in there was, my own decision to completely block off the interest in long arms and really be stuck in my little spherical world of home sewing machine quilting, because I had just decided I didn't have the money for it. I had decided that it wasn't for me. I had decided I didn't have the space for it. And I had just been so rigid in all of those decisions that I couldn't possibly open myself up to even be curious about it. It was like, oh, I'm not allowed to want that. When I finally released my death grip on that idea and became curious about it, it opened up a whole new world of creative possibilities. It was not emotional. It was fun. So I hope that that's what you take from this podcast episode. I hope that this has inspired you to learn more about long arm quilting, rent time in your local area. If you have questions about long arms, please post them in the comments below. If you have something nasty to say about it, which I have received my whole long brand of nasty about this topic, really for a long time, I can only say this: there's no reason to be nasty about it at all. There's no reason to be competitive or feel bad about it. There's no reason to be stuck up on either side, whether you're sticking with a home sewing machine or you're on a long arm. It's just not necessary to go there. It really, really isn't. It's a machine. And just like I don't get emotional about using my power drill or my power saws, I'm not getting emotional about using my long arm either. So I hope that this has helped. Come and check out the Quilt Friends Club if you'd like to help support this podcast and all of the free tutorials I share every week. And of course, you will be entered to win this Kona Cotton Not Quite White palette roll-up. So definitely join in the fun. Come join us at the Quilt Friends Club at quiltfriends.club. Until next time, let's go quilt.